Everybody, welcome back to another episode of Shifty's 49ers Talk. In this video, I want to discuss the 49ers 2023 draft class, and in particular, I want to talk about their roles and expectations for their rookie year and maybe into their second and third year. Now, it is important to remember that the 49ers didn't make their first pick until pick 87 overall after we traded up with the Minnesota Vikings. So, keep in mind that we do have to have realistic expectations for these players. The 49ers have arguably the deepest roster in the NFL prior to the draft, so it's going to be really hard for a lot of these guys to make a big splash, to make a big impact in their rookie year. Not saying that it won't happen, but I think as Niner fans, we do have to be realistic in our expectations for this draft class that, in 2023, we may not see a huge impact, but I do think 2024 and beyond, that's where you're going to see the real value from this draft class. So, without any further ado, let's get into each of the players the 49ers took in this year's draft. The Niners' first pick in the draft was at 87 overall after we traded up from 102 with the Minnesota Vikings. And we took safety Jair Brown out of Penn State, and I think this was a fantastic pick. When I look at Jair Brown, really just a turnover machine his last 2 years in college, which is when he was a full-time starter. We're talking 13 turnovers forced in 2 seasons, 10 interceptions, and 3 fumbles forced, and he was a guy who really just seemed to be in the right place at the right time, and that's so important for the safety position. You being able to read, diagnose the play, and be where you're supposed to be and put yourself in a position to make plays. Now, looking at what do I expect from him, what do I think his role is going to be? Year one, I think it's going to be mostly special teams. I think he's going to be there for quality depth, so should there be an injury, then he'll see meaningful snaps. But what I expect is to be there special teams to make an impact there, probably play a lot of snaps in the preseason, and should there be an injury to a guy, let's say like a Tashawn Gibson, then we see Jair Brown come in. Now, year two, though, that's where I have some serious expectations for Jair Brown. I think he'll become a full-time starter, and not to say that he'll have the career ascension of a Talanoa Hufanga, who was an all-pro in his second year, but I think he should be a very, very good starter moving forward. However, let's be realistic. If he doesn't have a huge impact his rookie year, that's kind of the plan all along, simply because we're going to have Gibson and Hufanga starting at safety, but I do think it's a great pick in the long term. The second pick the 49ers made in the draft was definitely their most controversial one, and that was taking kicker Jake Moody at number 99 overall. Now, say what you will about the value, about the other players available, let's talk about the player that we did draft, and that's Jake Moody. So if we look at his last 2 years at Michigan, I thought the numbers were pretty solid, and ultimately I would essentially like him to just replicate what he did on average the last 2 years. So what I mean by that is he hit on 87% of his field goal attempts, and also had about a 65% touchback rate from kickoffs. You compare that to some of the top kickers in the NFL. Justin Tucker last year hit on 86% of his field goal attempts, had a 68% touchback rate. Compare it also to our very own Robbie Gould. Last year, 84% field goal completion percentage and only 50% touchback rate. So if Moody can basically replicate what he's done the last couple of years, I think he'll be a very reliable kicker. The big thing is going to be, how does he perform in the playoffs? Of course, Robbie Gould was perfect, 100% field goal conversion rate in the playoffs. Obviously, Jake Moody can't do better than that, and it's kind of unfair to expect him to never miss in the playoffs. But if he can be a reliable kicker, convert those in clutch moments, then I think ultimately this could be a very good pick for the 49ers. And those are my expectations for him. I think it's very realistic. Just keep the numbers that you've done in college into the NFL. Let's now talk about the 49ers' third pick in this year's NFL draft, and that's tight end Cameron Latu out of Alabama. Now, if you look at his profile, Cameron Latu, not the most athletic guy, but I do think he is a really good fit for the 49ers. Overall, in his career at Alabama, 12 touchdowns, which is actually the most in Alabama history for a tight end. He also had over 750 receiving yards and over 50 receptions. Now, if I look at what's his role going to be with the Niners? Well, ideally, long-term, he'll be the number 2 tight end to essentially back up George Kittle. The Niners have tried to fill that role with veterans like Jordan Reed, Tyler Kroft. We've also drafted Charlie Werner. None of those guys have really been able to live up to that billing. And if George Kittle, and we know how physical he plays, he's going to miss a couple of games every season, you've got to have some legitimate backup. So I like the Niners addressing this position. But to go back to Latu, what are his expectations for his rookie year? I think it's going to be pretty slow to get going. Dwelly and Werner have been in the system for a number of years. They're very familiar with the system. Tight ends, notoriously, it can take a while to basically get the whole offense down because you're responsible for so many things. Whether it's blocking at the end of the line, receiving, you got to run block, you got to pass block. You got to be very, very aware of not only your role, but the role of all 11 players on the field on offense. So I think it's going to be pretty slow to start off, but I'd like to see him carve out a role for himself as the year goes on into the playoffs. And then when it comes to year 2, what I'd like to see from Latu is him basically firmly cementing himself in as the number 2 tight end for the team. But again, guys, let's be realistic with our expectations here. It's the end of the 3rd round, rookie tight end. It's going to take him some time to get going. The next pick the 49ers made was in the 5th round, and we took Daryl Ladner Jr. out of South Alabama. He's a DB, and I think this was a really, really solid pick. And this is a pick that, in the vein of a lot of 49er picks in recent years, is that I believe this is a pick that, look, we're probably not going to see a huge impact year 1, but ideally year 2 that's when you really start to see this pick pay off. So if we look at him, ran a 4.4 40, so pretty athletic, turnover guy too, 5 interceptions the last 2 years at South Alabama. If I look at what his expectations or what his role is going to be, I think initially it's going to be a pretty slow start. You go from South Alabama to the NFL, it's a massive leap in terms of just the level of competition. However, that doesn't mean that he can't make that leap himself and really rise to the occasion. I think his rookie year, probably going to see his name a lot on special teams. You'll see him play a lot in preseason to earn those snaps. Don't think you'll see him on the field too much unless we just get, devastated with injuries at cornerback, which obviously hope that doesn't happen. However, I think where you'll see Ladner and the value of this pick is going to be 2024, 2025, just being and providing just quality depth at the cornerback position. Should we suffer injuries there, he needs to be able to come in and hold his own. I'm not saying he needs to be a shutdown guy, but just hold his own out there. Basically not having any Brian Allen type, meltdowns on the field. And we saw the 49ers in 2021. We were devastated with injuries at cornerback, and it just goes to show you how important depth is to have at a position like that, where it's just so important in today's NFL. So to kind of sum up this pick, I don't think we're going to see a huge impact necessarily this year, but it is one where down the road, year 2, year 3, where he could come in, pressed into action, and basically hold his own, then I'd be very happy with this pick. The next pick that the 49ers had was also in the 5th round, and we took edge player Robert Beale Jr. out of Georgia. And to me, this is a really, really good pick. Not only, for the fit and for the athletic profile that he has, which is just blends so well with what the 49ers do defensively, but I think it's a great long-term pick. If you look at, what do I expect from him in his rookie year? It's going to be pretty difficult for him to see consistent snaps. He's going to be, in competition with a lot of veteran guys. Drake Jackson, albeit only going into his 2nd year, has had that whole first year to really develop and hone in his skills. Then you go up against guys like Cleveland Farrell, Austin Bryant, Kerry Hyder, guys who've been in the league for quite some time. So it's going to be hard to take snaps away from those, but not saying that it's impossible. So his rookie year, I think maybe you'll see him be like a 2-3 sack guy. Like to see him maybe make some plays in preseason, a play here and there throughout the regular season. But then in 2024, I think he could be a predominant feature with regards to a rotational pass rush. Just to be there maybe on 3rd downs, obvious passing down situations. And if he can really carve out a role to be a 5 to 7 sack guy a year, I think that would be just absolutely justify the pick. And I think it would be a really great move to get a guy in the 5th round, fits the defense really, really well. And I think that this pick could end up being a really, really good one. He is one of those guys that Look, we know how good that Georgia defense was in college, and maybe one of those guys that kind of got overlooked, overshadowed by some other players. And I think coming to San Francisco, surrounded by a ton of talented guys in a really good scheme fit, could be perfect for his development as an NFL player. The next pick the 49ers made was maybe my favorite pick of the entire draft, and that was in the 6th round. We took linebacker D. Winters out of TCU. And to me, when you look at D on the field, he just screams 49ers linebacker. Look at his numbers from last year: 7.5 sacks from the inside linebacker spot, 14 tackles for loss. Over the last 2 years, 3 interceptions. So he's making plays all over the field, not afraid to shoot the gaps, trust his eyes, trust his athleticism to make those big plays. He's also a great fit for what we're going to see in the Steve Wilks defense. A lot more blitzing, and that's going to play into his skill set. So let's talk about now his roles or expectations moving forward. Look, he's not gonna basically take the job of a Dre Greenlaw or Fred Warner in his rookie year. That's asking way too much, but I do think you'll see him on special teams. You'll see him a lot in the preseason, and of course, if there are any injuries, then he can step in and play. His main competition is going to be guys like Oren Burks, Demetrius Flannigan-Foles, and the like. But I do think long-term, this could be a great pick. And even in his second year, we might not see a ton of him because the NFL and the 49ers do play with a lot of just 2 linebacker sets, and that's going to be, Greenlaw and Warner. But I think with Greenlaw, he's under contract for 2 more years. Then 2025, you might see D. Winters just explode onto the scene. And that's a phrase I'm using a lot because I think the Niners have in this draft have targeted guys who are playmakers and who are just highly athletic, hyper athletic, and they have a lot of upside. So if the Niners can develop them, and they've shown that in recent years, especially a linebacker, being able to develop middle, late round guys into really effective players. I think overall, what are my expectations really the next couple of years? Maybe kind of playing that Azeez Al-Shaair role, that number 3 linebacker role, but then moving into, and I think he could eventually be a really good starting linebacker for the 49ers moving forward. Love this pick, my favorite of the entire draft. Moving into the 7th round of the NFL draft, the first of 3 picks the 49ers made in this round was Brayden Willis, the tight end out of Oklahoma. And something I really like about Willis is he has that positional versatility. He can, play a tight end at the end of the line. He can also line up at H-back, at fullback. And that's something that we know that Shanahan really covets, that positional versatility. And I think also, Willis has the stats to back it up too. Last year, 7 touchdowns, over 500 receiving yards, and he's got good size, 6'4", 235. And I think that the pick here, along with taking Latu earlier, really shows that the 49ers are serious about upgrading the tight end position. With that being said, though, I think that Willis, initially the goal and his role, his responsibility, expectation would be if he can make the 53-man roster his rookie year, that to me would be a huge win right there. He's got an uphill battle. Of course, when you look at tight ends, if we keep 4, you're going to have Kittle, you're going to have Latu, who we took in the 3rd round, and then you have Dwelly, Werner, and then you have Willis. So 2 of the last 3 guys are going to make the roster. And of course, those other guys, they have the experience, the familiarity that Shanahan also likes to rely on at that position. So I think Willis has got to try and find a way in preseason, in training camp, to impress. I loved the video of Willis when he got drafted, basically saying 31 teams are going to regret it. Love the passion. I think he's hyper competitive, and I think he's a good fit for what we do. So it's possible, and ideally he does make the roster in his first year, but that's not a guarantee. Moving forward, however, what I'd like to see is year 2, if he can basically firmly entrench himself as being a member of the 53-man roster, making a couple of plays here and there, and then by year 3, if he can develop into that number 3 tight end, let's say a guy who can step up if there are injuries and be able to make some plays, that you think you'd really have to be happy with based on where he was drafted in the 7th round. It can be really, really hit or miss here, but I do like the fit with Willis. I just think he's going to have a really difficult time to maybe earn some meaningful snaps on the offense, but hopefully he can do it. the 49ers second pick in the 7th round, we took wide receiver Ronnie Bell out of Michigan. And I think this was a really good pick, and it's a really good fit also for what the Niners do. He is that prototypical Kyle Shanahan receiver. Well, he has that same size that Shanahan usually covets. He's very physical, good after the catch, willing blocker, and really good against zone defense and finding the soft spot there. So that all speaks to some really good, potential that Ronnie Bell has to succeed in this offense. Also has some really solid numbers to back it up. 900 receiving yards, 5 touchdowns last year. However, he has a massive uphill battle in order to make this roster. If you think about it, the 49ers will most likely keep 5, maybe 6 receivers on the roster, and he's competing with Debo, Ayuk, Jawan Jennings, Ray McLeod, Danny Gray, Chris Conley, Willie Snead, and then you have Ronnie Bell. That's going to be really difficult to crack the 53-man roster. So my expectations for him are probably going to be on the practice squad in year 1, but I would like to see him play a lot in preseason just to be able to get a good look at what he's capable of doing in this type of offense. Now, I think year 2 is where you're going to see where we could actually have an impact on this team, where in 2024 it's very possible that there won't be Jawan Jennings, there won't be Ray McLeod, Danny Gray still a bit of a question mark, Chris Conley and Willie Snead also signed to 1-year deals. So I think in year 2, which is where you could see a career ascension for Ronnie Bell. And what I mean by a career ascension is maybe being the number 4, number 5 wide receiver, should there be any injuries being called upon, to be able to play some relatively meaningful snaps. By year 3, ideally, that's where he can make some big strides there. And it takes receivers a couple of years to adjust to the NFL game. So I think ultimately what would be a dream scenario for me is he can develop into maybe a number 3, number 4 wide receiver, because there will be opportunities for him, not year 1, but I think year 2, year 3, where ideally he could turn into a Kendrick Bourne type guy. That would be an awesome turnout for the 49ers for Ronnie Bell. With the final pick in the 2023 draft, the Niners took linebacker Jalen Graham out of Purdue. And this was actually a guy that they were targeting in the 6th round, where they took D. Winters, and they were able to still get him in the 7th round. So it worked out very well for the 49ers. Now, Graham is one of those guys who's kind of like a safety linebacker hybrid, bit of a Swiss Army knife on defense. If you look at him, he's also a playmaker too. 3 interceptions the last 2 years, and really one of those guys, an ideal matchup for like bigger tight ends, like guys like Travis Kelce. Not saying that he would be able to shut down Kelce by any means, but to match up against those kind of players. So he definitely has a specific role right there, and he has a specific skill set that I think could help him in getting into the roster. Now, talking about the roster and talking about expectations for a guy like Jalen Graham, I think year 1, look, he has a lot of competition at that linebacker safety role, so I think we'll probably see him on the practice squad year 1. If he's not snatched up by another team, then I think year 2 we would see him, and ideally he could crack the 53-man roster, probably carve out a role for himself on special teams, and then year 3 finally being able to solidify himself as maybe the number 3 or number 4 linebacker on the team, probably still a contributor on special teams, but I think that's going to be the pathway that a guy like Jalen Graham's going to have to make if he wants to be successful with the 49ers. Overall, like the pick, like the fit, and I think he does have a future with the 49ers here. So really, really happy, not only with the Jalen Graham pick, but a lot of these guys. I love what the 49ers have done in this year's draft, where, they recognize the fact that we have a really deep and talented roster. So it's looking at players with high potential, high upside, who long term maybe won't contribute a ton in 2023, but being able to replenish the roster for 2024 and beyond. And that's what I think the 49ers did a great job this year at. So that's really my summary there of the 49ers 2023 draft. Thank you so much, guys, for checking out this video, and of course, do leave your thoughts in the comments below. Let me know your thoughts on the players that we drafted, who were some of your favorite players we drafted, some of your least favorite picks, and why. Always happy to hear from the 49er faithful about that. And of course, if you like the content, do consider dropping a like on the video, subscribing to the channel. Really appreciate everyone for checking out the content. And guys, before I head out, I am going to say 2 things, and that is the butt counts, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.